When beginners first start sewing with knit fabrics, they are often frustrated because every seam they sew seems to come out wavy and puckered. You can see here I'm sewing a seam with some knit fabric, and the resulting seam is extremely wavy. Not what we want in our finished garments. Rest assured though that you can fix this problem by following just 3 simple steps. First, use a walking foot in your machine. Part of the reason that knit fabric stretches during sewing is because the presser foot and feed dogs stretch the fabric out as it is fed into the machine. The walking foot basically makes the presser foot on top of the fabric move, just like the feed dogs underneath the fabric. This means that both layers of the fabric should feed through evenly, which should in turn reduce the stretching. Second, place some tissue paper over your fabric, in between the presser foot and the fabric. This helps stop the fabric from being eaten by the sewing machine and prevents the fabric from stretching out. After the seam is stitched, I rip away the tissue paper, leaving a beautiful flat seam. One downside to this method is that sometimes tiny pieces of paper are left stuck in the seam, and you need to get a pair of tweezers to pick the bits of paper out. I try to avoid this by lifting the tissue paper until it is perpendicular to the fabric, and then tearing. I find this usually gives me a clean tear, although sometimes little pieces of paper are still left in the seam, despite my best efforts. The third step is to press the seam with steam. I usually hover the iron over the seam with steam for a few seconds, then press the iron gently on the seam and give it a nice press. This magically presses out most of the puckers, leaving a nice flat seam. And voila! These 3 simple steps yield a nice flat seam free of puckers or waves. Now, if I am hemming knit fabrics instead of sewing a seam, I'll follow the same 3 steps, but before I sew the hem in place, I'll iron a 1/2-inch strip of lightweight fusible knit interfacing to the hem. This helps stabilize the fabric and makes it easier to get a nice flat hem, free of puckers. It also has the added side benefit of reducing skipped stitches, which often occur when sewing with lightweight jerseys. I find it a pain to interrupt my project to cut strips of fusible interfacing, so instead, I cut lots of strips of fusible interfacing in advance, so I always have some strips on hand whenever I start working on a knit project. And that's it! With these 3 simple steps, it's easy to sew knit fabrics without puckering.